Coalition Purple back on the air. And here it is, Thursday once again, when we record. Yep. And I don't know. I think it's an age thing. You know, the older you get, the faster life goes. I have kind of concluded.
Yeah. Yep.
When you're younger, it's like, oh, this day is never going to end, or, you know, whatever. Christmas is never coming, or whatever. And now it's like, oh, God, just slow down.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I remember I used to think that the school year was just endless. You know, it's like, oh my God,
right.
it goes on and on. It never ends. And now it's like years go by and you're like, geez, that was 2 years ago, 3 years ago that thing happened. It's like, oh man. So yeah, I'm definitely with you there. Things go faster and faster.
So I guess the silver lining in that, whatever concerns we have, they'll go away faster than we think, right?
Yeah, or either that or doomsday is approaching at an ever-increasing rate.
Exactly. Pick the whether it's half full or half empty, right?
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, so what's happening your way?
Well, one thing that I saw this week that I was sort of interested in, because I think it's sort of well, in a way, a good news for third parties, was they had this poll that went around, and I'm sure you've probably seen it. I mean, a lot of people have, because it's been making big news about how the Democrats are now more unpopular than they've ever been. I think the approval rating that they had on that particular survey was that the approval rating for the Democrats was down to 27%, which is just miserably low. Right. But I think what's being really underreported about that survey is the approval rating for the Republicans was 35.
Right. Exactly.
So if you add those two together, you get 62% of respondents saying that they approve of one party or the other, which means that 38% of the respondents didn't approve of either party. And that's the biggest number in the survey, right? 38 is more than the Republicans' 35 or the Democrats' 27. So if you think about that, you know, has there ever been a better time to start a third party?
No, exactly. It's so funny you brought that up, because that was one of the things on my list. I found that so fascinating, because the Democrat side did get kind of all the news, but the Republicans were right there behind them.
Yeah, I mean, people do not like our politics in this country. That's just absolutely
no, exactly. And I was watching. I actually was watching a broadcast with. Let's see, it was the Open Primaries group. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
I haven't.
And they had Chuck Todd on there, the guy that used to do Meet the Press. Is that Meet the Press? Anyways, the journalist. And he was just talking about how fractured it is, and from his vantage point, and supposedly the objective journalist, is this couldn't be a better time for a third party, because Democrats are going down in flames, but people just don't like the direction the Republican Party has gone, and so he was making that exact point. It's like, that's the crazy part. But the other point that he made that was interesting is, at the end of the day, what you have to realize is both these parties are basically ruled by the billionaires on each side.
Yeah.
And he said, you got to fix that problem, because a third party is going to always be challenged just because of the money part of it. He's not saying a third party should go find its share of billionaires. That wasn't what he was suggesting. But you got to solve that money equation to try and keep things a little more on an equal platform, which I found very interesting.
Yeah, I agree with the money sentiment of things, because that was another thing. Going way back to the first episodes of this podcast that we ever did, I had talked about the idea of trying to start my own political party. And I've still looked into that and sort of tried to figure out whether or not that's actually something that's possible. And for me personally, I simply don't have the physical, mental, or financial resources to start a political party. And the financial part of it is part of the big burden. And so it brings us back to this podcast and sort of, you know, where can we contribute if we're not going to actually start the party? And I think that is just putting ideas out in there that a third party could use or other people could use to sort of create something that would be good enough that even in the absence of equivalent funding to the other parties could have such a broad appeal to the population of all the disenfranchised voters that are in California. to actually have a shot at winning some races and actually making some progress in a good direction. And bearing that in mind, I looked at a few things that were sort of sort of thinking about, like, what is that? What would we define as the issues that, like, in this coming gubernatorial election, when everyone is dissatisfied with the Democrats, and certainly no one is super happy about Gavin Newsom, that what would I run on, or what would I suggest are the sort of the platform that I think a third party could go after. And so I came up with a few things, and I'll try and go through them a little bit quickly, and then we can talk about some of them.
Yeah.
So the first one is transparency, which I think is critical to everything, because you can't really change much of everything if you don't actually know what's going on. So the first thing to do is like a radical audit of the government. But I think that that's absolutely something people could run on doing
Right.
a radical audit and getting all the information potentially out there, so that people can actually start making better decisions about things. Now, the next thing that always comes to mind, and we've talked about this on the site a million times too, is reducing costs.
Yep.
And the reason I really wanted to talk about that one today, more than any of the other things that I might mention, is because I want to mention a few things about how you would reduce costs, and how the government and elected officials can reduce costs. Because it's like there's a lot of things in the world that we experienced that the government isn't really in charge of, and therefore can't necessarily affect. And we talk a lot on this program about the federal government versus the state government, and the overall state government versus local government. And there's so many different things that so many different groups could change, that I want to just mention a couple of things that could really, I think, potentially help to reduce costs. And the last big one was running on actual infrastructure.
Issues.
Yeah, and it's like, if you do the audit and you get some transparency, and we realize that we can do some infrastructure things without funding all these wasteful NGOs and actually get something done, then that could make a huge difference in how California actually works and functions. And I think it could also be good for lowering costs for things too, because if we had a better, more efficient infrastructure, then we could start to lower costs for people. So anyway, I just want to throw those those ideas out there, and just get anything that you think about them, and then I'll go into some of the other things.
Yeah, well, just looking at the three, it's an interesting mirror of actually what is going on in the federal level. I mean, transparency, I don't see it really existing in the approach that's going on right now in terms of how they're closing things down and all that. Again, I think that would be a perfect one, to your point, at the federal level, that if they really focused on transparency and really, revealing why they're doing certain things, you would have vast majority of people on board with it. It's just the way they're going about it. So same way with California, that we should learn a lesson from what's going on in the federal here in California. And I totally agree with you on that part of it. The reducing costs, real quickly on that one, back on the Chuck Todd thing. The other thing that he said that was fascinating to me, hopefully I can find a link to this where they were talking to him. He referenced Ross Perot. You would love this.
Yeah.
From, I think, what was that, 1992, I think?
Yep.
And he said, you need to look at Ross Perot. People look at that as, well, he didn't win. He didn't get enough votes. But what he did transformed the country in many ways. He said right after that, Clinton was the first president in a long time, and probably the only president since then, that actually had a balanced budget.
Exactly.
Right. And that was a big part of what Ross Perot talked about. And his point was that probably wouldn't have happened if Ross Perot hadn't been in the game. And he said on the Republican side, he also was really pushing on transparency and things like that, and that they need, and in particular when it comes to international trade. And he was forecasting that, listen, we need to figure this out because our workers are not going to be able to compete against Mexico and China and all. I mean, He was talking about that way back then, and he said they actually moved to the center on that, and that's when there was actually a little more interest in trying to figure out the trade stuff, right? And then on the infrastructure thing, yeah, I mean that seems like one of the most outside of safety, police and fire. that is the main role of government, and I was surprised you didn't. Well, maybe this is in your notes under infrastructure that you didn't bring up uh, all the things going and reduce costs, all the things going on in LA since they're in $1 billion deficit, and and infrastructure. I heard that at least the Altadena fire sounds like it probably was started by the power lines
Yeah.
that should have been underground long ago.
Yeah.
Anyways, I think these are three really, really great points that somebody could run on.
Yeah. Well, as I say, I have there's a myriad of other things that I would do too, but considering the fact we want to keep this under, an all day experience, I figured I'd work on those three first, because the things that the couple of things that I really wanted to hit too was about cost, because we've talked about cost so many times on this program about, so many of the problems that people reflect on, like, earning a living wage. That's
Right.
something that needs to get talked about more and more and more. But part of earning a living wage is you have to earn enough money to pay for whatever it is you need to live on. And if everything is more expensive, then you need to earn more money.
Right.
So thinking about that, I looked up the average median income in California and Florida. And I'm just comparing California and Florida because they're kind of similar. So the median income in California right now, or no, I guess this was maybe in 2023. I mean, so it's changed a little bit.
Yeah.
Was $95.5 thousand. So $95,500 median. And then in
Right.
Florida, it was 73.3 median. So about 25% less. Florida makes
Right.
median income is about 25% less in Florida. But the average median home price in California is $765,000, and the median home price in Florida is $392,000. So about half.
Yeah.
So
Right.
even if you just look at those numbers, and obviously, we're talking about, there's a million different things that go into this.
Yeah.
It's twice as expensive essentially to live in California, but you're only making 25% more of
Right.
income. So it doesn't work well for California. That's why California is struggling right now, and Florida is, at least according to Floridians, is thriving. But there's a few other things that I want to talk about cost. Like, how do you get costs down so that the 95.5 that you're making in California, actually pays for the things you want to pay? And the first one is taxes. Obviously, if you lower people's taxes, then everyone who pays taxes is getting a lowered cost. So that's just sort of what that is. But not everybody pays taxes, and it would have a differential effect on different people's and whatever. But I'm just saying, if you lower taxes, you do lower costs. Sure. That's one thing. But the other thing that really hits me is energy. And energy is just huge. So I looked up the average kilowatt per hour in California and Florida. So the average kilowatt per hour energy cost in California is $30.60. The average kilowatt per hour in Florida, $14.20. So our average kilowatt per hour in this state is more than twice what it is in Florida. And everything needs energy. Absolutely everything that you do needs energy. And they, the price of eggs thing that people talk about, putting the bird flu aside and that, actually have eggs. But it's like, to run the farm, to keep the chicken coops, built and heated so they have a place where they can lay eggs, that's energy. Then to harvest the eggs and load them into something is energy. And then to transport the eggs to the store is energy. And then to run the refrigerator in the store is energy. It's like, if all of that energy that you're using to do all those things at all those different steps cost twice as much, well, obviously eggs are going to cost a hell of a lot more. So, I mean, getting energy costs down would be monumental. And then the other part about energy, which is also energy and taxes, which is why I looked it up, is gas. So the average gallon of gas in California, $4.77. Average gallon in Florida, $3.01. So I mean, it's like, why? One of the reasons that our gas is so expensive is taxes.
Oh, totally.
But when you put taxes on energy, which is gas, then you're making people pay more for energy. So I would say that as far as like running for office and being a party that's supposed to be a party of ideas, if you're going to have a third party, let's start talking realistically about the cost of living in California and what the government can actually do to get costs down.
Right.
The energy costs in California energy is so heavily regulated, and there's so many requirements on like where the energy has to come. Like there's all these things about what percentage of the energy that we get in California that has to be generated by green sources. And so we don't have the green energy in California that we need to do that. So we import energy from places like, Arizona, New
Right.
Mexico, and other places. And it's like all of these things are raising the cost of California energy, which raises the cost of everything. And then we put more taxes on gas, and then we put more taxes on people. We have the highest sales tax, the highest, income tax. We have the highest cost of doing business because of, regulatory things. It's maddening. I mean, everything in California costs more than it does anywhere else, which goes back to the transparency part of it. We need to
Yeah.
start sorting through everything that the government is doing, all the regulations that have been written, all the ways that they're spending the money, and start to get a handle on that kind of thing so that we can start getting cost of living down. Because, I mean, in some ways, it's analogous to the bad schools in California. It's like, well, we need to spend more money on schools because our schools are crappy. But we already spend the most money on schools. So what are you
Yeah.
talking about? And it's like, well, we need to help people, do better by having a higher minimum wage. Well, we already have the highest wages. How much higher are our wages really supposed to go? But the problem is none of that keeps up with cost. And so
Right.
that's where we find ourselves in all this trouble. So again, as far as like running a party or moving forward with something new, uh, those kind of things I think just have to be talked about more.
Right. And in my mind, that is, I don't know, maybe I'm being way too waffly on this, but I don't see that as a Republican or Democrat issue. That's just a citizens issue. I mean, I
Right.
don't see, I don't see how anybody can justify the cost of living in California if you take any kind of objective measure. And now, yeah, there's some devil in the details there. Florida doesn't
Yeah.
probably go through some of the seasonal changes that we do. I mean, if you go up to northern parts of California, I mean, they get pummeled with snow and stuff like that. And all those things kind of add up into it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's clear if you compared probably Southern California with Florida, it would be a little bit maybe more equal. But then I think the um, differentiation would be even larger. The gap would be even larger. It's
Yeah.
probably more expensive even down here compared to Northern California. By that, I mean above San Francisco, which
Yeah.
is Central
Northern
California, right?
California.
I mean,
Jefferson.
yeah, right.
Thank you,
Jefferson County, right? And so I get why people up there are like, hey, what do we have to do with all that craziness going on down there? I kind of get it, totally. So yeah, and at the end of the day, you're right. I think it starts with just truly having an objective view of where all the money's going, and again, that's why I say it's parallels to the federal government, where the federal government is failing big time. I think
Yeah.
is on the transparency part. They're kind of going through the motions to make it look like they're doing a lot of stuff, and they are doing a lot of stuff, but with no rhyme or reason. But that should be our lesson. Hey, don't ding it for setting a goal. Let's
Yeah.
set that goal in California, but let's do it in the right way to make sure that we are filling in all those nuanced things. And, if you do cut this, it's like I was talking to a friend of mine back in New York, and he had done some like political canvassing and stuff in New Jersey, I believe it was. And I forget what they call their Medicaid system there.
Mm.
But as he talked to people, they have a different name, kind of like here in California, I think it's called Medi-Cal, right?
Yeah.
So people, when they hear Medicaid, that they're going to get rid of Medicaid, they think it's this thing. They don't realize we're really talking about Medi-Cal or whatever they call it in New Jersey, all these kinds of things. So they're all for getting rid of Medicaid, not realizing, well,
Yeah.
that's what you're getting as a retired veteran or whatever, right?
Well,
And
it's
but that's not to say it shouldn't be looked at,
right.
because it's crazy lot of money.
Well, it's actually funny that you brought that up because that was one of the things that I was going to say. So, first of all, what we have in California is called Medi-Cal.
Right.
And so Medi-Cal receives federal funding from Medicaid. So
Right.
part of the funding for Medi-Cal comes from the federal government, and which is the federal It's called Medicaid. So we have Medi-Cal in California.
Yep.
So one of the things that I actually was looking at when I was thinking about costs and things recently was Medi-Cal, because even Newsom and the government came out recently and had to borrow $6.2 billion or something like that to pay for Medi-Cal shortfalls.
Yep.
And so this goes to transparency and waste and whatever, and just generally how we want to do things, in California. So the entire cost of Medi-Cal last year was, I think, $9.5 billion or something like that. There are 15 million or so people that use Medi-Cal,
Mm-hmm.
of which 1.6 million are in the country illegally, because the requirement for Medi-Cal is that you have to be below or like just above what the poverty line is
Poverty
considered.
levels. Yeah.
So if you're just above poverty, nobody asks you about whether or not you're here legally or you're a resident of California or you're a citizen of the United States. None of that matters. It's just about where you are on the poverty line. So there's an estimated 1.6 million people using Medi-Cal in, obviously that's the California program. So in California.
Right.
And so if you do the math on it, it comes out to about a little over $1 billion a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so every year we spend in California $1 billion to fund healthcare for people entering the state illegally. And
Right.
so the question just becomes, going forward, is like when you talk about elections or running people from, do we want to keep doing that? Can we afford to keep doing that?
Right.
I mean, if we say that anyone who can get into California for any reason gets free medical care, well, then is it surprising to anyone that our medical care system in California is completely nuts, and now the state is borrowing $6 billion to try and pay for it all?
Right.
I mean,
Well, oh, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, well, no, I'm just saying, I mean, it's just a question. Do you want to vote for what's going on now, borrowing $6 billion, or do you want to actually do something to try and save Medi-Cal so that it's actually working better and is more efficient? You just got to make a choice.
No, exactly. It's very analogous to the homeless situation. It's like if you make it inviting, and I'm not saying that we have necessarily busloads of homeless people showing up every day, but there's definitely an incentive to move here if you can in some way, shape, or form, if you're living in Chicago or whatever, right? I mean, just for the weather alone, right?
Right.
And it's not, and that's why doing the audit and really understanding this stuff would really help trying to find a practical way to do this, because we have enough money
Right.
to probably help people that really need the help. It's not about shutting down programs just to be shutting down programs. It's about making sure we can actually solve the problem. And homeless and Medi-Cal are two great examples of where we're spending a boatload of money and seeing very few results in terms of making it efficient, not only efficient, but actually a good, decent service to provide those who truly need it. Because there are people that truly need it.
And I think there's a lot going on right now in sort of that discussion when they talk about Medi-Cal, Medicare, Social Security and all these things. It's like, if you actually want to save those programs, then you should have a vested interest in seeing them run as well and efficiently as possible. Yeah. I mean, the fastest way to drive Medicare and Social Security and Medi-Cal, for that matter, into bankruptcy is to have immense amounts of fraud payments having to go out all the time. And so it's expending all of this money that it doesn't have. And so, that's the transparency. That's the audit. We have to get a handle on where the money is actually going and what it's being used for. And then when it's being used for things that aren't productive, we can take that money, hopefully, and spend it on things like infrastructure. And that's where that whole series of 3 things I was talking about sort of come together. You need to know what's going on. You need to understand the effect of cost on everyday lives of people. And then once you start recovering the money and lowering costs, you can finally afford to do things like infrastructure. And if you can get the cost down and you can recover money, you could build all the things that you want to build. But you got to get the money back first.
Right. Well, and again, and I know you understand this, but on the Medi-Cal stuff and all these things, fraud is a piece of it, but I'm sure a lot of it is just pure bureaucracy.
Oh yeah.
That's a big part of it, and that's the thing that's frustrating on the federal side right now, where they keep saying waste, fraud, and abuse. I totally agree. That's great. Let's look at that. We need to, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of it is just bureaucracy. Number one, and they're not really looking at it in that holistic way. You can't look at any one of these issues and just say, hey, too many people are scamming the system. I'm sure
Hmm.
there's some, but I think there's a lot more to it than just that. Or because then they do the other thing, right? They're going to close. They're going to start forcing Social Security people to go in and register in person now. It's like,
Yeah.
well, is that really going to be more efficient than doing it online? Maybe we should try and fix the online thing if there is a problem,
Yeah.
because having people, you're closing offices down and you want people to come in. It's like, this makes no sense. But again, it comes back to your first point about the transparency and the audit, and be objective about it.
Yeah.
And people shouldn't shy away, to your point on um, with people who come here illegally. At least, in the world that I've tended to live in on the progressive side, people say, you can't say that. Nobody's illegal and blah, blah, blah. That's not what's being said. They did cross illegally. So we do have to shore that up. But at the same time, it's like other people are paying into some of these systems. And again, I understand whether they're legal migrants or illegal migrants, and I know that's politically incorrect, that they all pay taxes at some level. They buy
Yeah. They do.
gas, they buy groceries, whatever. They all buy at some point. And we have to take all that stuff into account. But a lot of their wages, frankly, are under the table. They're not paying a whole lot when it comes to income tax or those things that support these programs. So we just have to take an honest look at it. It's not trying to say anybody is 100% at fault at anything. It's like we just have to try and figure out how to get out of the hole we just dug for ourselves.
Right. And a lot of it is really just numbers. I
It
mean,
is.
what you see in California right now is a lot of the more middle class sort of like level of people are leaving and going elsewhere.
Yeah.
But the population of California is staying roughly the same. But what we're bringing in to replace the middle class and the affluent are people who are generally more poor and more oriented towards low education, sort of more manual type jobs.
Right.
So you're changing the tax base when you do that. And it
Sure.
doesn't have anything to do with nationality or legality or anything else. It just has to do with numbers. If
Right.
you exchange middle class earners for low wage earners, your tax base goes away,
Right.
which means you can't fund things like Medi-Cal, which is why Medi-Cal is in such a deep hole. And so, it's just kind of numbers are reality. I always
Right.
felt like facts should never be insulting. And
Exactly.
numbers are facts. Facts
Exactly.
don't have an opinion. Facts
Right.
aren't racist. They're just facts.
Right.
And you may feel badly about them, or you may not like what the facts are, but it doesn't
Right.
change that they are the facts. And so we need a party in California, honestly, that's willing to deal with facts and just
Facts.
state what the facts are. We're exchanging middle class wage earners for low income wage earners in California.
Well,
So
it was
that's what it's
interesting. Yeah, I'll try and remember to put this in the show notes, but there was just an article that came out about that, and I think it was from last year, 2024, and basically the population in California was relatively flat, but the literally 100% of the increase that we had, which was roughly a million, but then almost a million left,
Mhm.
was all migration
Yeah.
for the most part. And to your point, and a mixture of both, documented and undocumented people. And literally, the headline says 100% of our population influx was due to migration. That's
Yeah.
like, wow, you know.
And
And
then
again, I don't see that as necessarily a bad thing. It's just all in how we come to terms with it
right.
and we deal with it.
Right. And as I say, if you look at the GDP of California, it's enormous.
Huge. Oh my
The
gosh.
resources in California are just incredible.
Yeah.
And
Bigger
the
than
fact,
Russia.
Yeah, in fact, that we have, like, I go back to education a lot. The fact that we have something like the 48th, we're like the 48th rank of 50 states
Right.
for education. I mean, you're the richest state in the nation. You have more resources than any state, and you have like the worst education system. This doesn't make any sense. And that's, again, that goes back to the transparency. What are we doing?
Right.
Why is the education system in California so awful?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we need to look at that, and we need to have people that are honest and objective, and are actually
Right.
willing to work on things.
Yeah, and just kind of lay down your arms, whether because I'm more and more of the and again, this is where I think a third party, to your point, comes into play. I'm not looking at these things as conservative or progressive issues. They're just
Yeah,
people issues.
yeah,
And I mean, I think more and more people are coming to that realization that we need to stop talking about it in this really arbitrary, you know, left versus right thing. I mean, these are all people issues at the end of the day,
yeah.
which I think the vast majority of people want to be kind of in the middle, and all the more reason to be that way. It's just like it just makes no sense anymore.
Yeah. And as they say, you just have to hope that somebody, I mean, I don't know exactly what the scenario is, but maybe even somebody who's independently minded, you know, running as a Democrat or Republican, but could really come out and be like, look, I get that I'm running as a Republican, or I get I'm running as a Democrat, but really I want to just do these things.
Yep.
And, maybe something like that could work, but I still always fall back to the idea that just discard them all, because they have no argument to make for anything.
They
I
don't.
mean, if you're an independent running for California governor, let's just take that one for example, and you start running on the things that we're talking about, I mean, how is Gavin Newsom going to, defend his positions on education? I mean,
Right.
there's no way. It's indefensible. On immigration, it's indefensible. On Medi-Cal, it's indefensible. On
Right.
transparency, indefensible. Energy costs, indefensible. Tax costs, indefensible. He can't. There's no argument to be made for Gavin
Yeah.
Newsom and the Democrats at this point. And obviously, there's no argument to be made for the Republicans because there aren't any.
Right. Well, yeah, and again, I don't even look at it anymore. I mean, it's just like until we get over this thing, and that's why I keep hoping the independent, non-registered voters keeps growing and growing and growing, which it
Yeah, it
is.
has to happen. It has to happen.
It's everywhere. I mean, that's the way out of it. Because if you're looking at either side to pull us out of this, it's not going to happen. And I think you do have to look at kind of the messaging coming out of culture. I really don't like the whole celebrity mentality kind of
Mm.
thing. People actually hook on to celebrities, but you do have to pay attention to it in the respect of that's where so many people think they get their news.
Yeah.
And the things that really have struck me in the last week or two is I've heard people like Jon Stewart or Bill Maher, these guys that have tended to be these big time progressives, I mean, just railing against Democrats about how
Yeah.
ineffective and they are. They have no ideas. They have, and when you hear people like that starting to go on, and obviously you have the critics on the Republican side with the Liz Cheneys of the world and stuff
Yeah.
like that. When you hear people in those cultural worlds kind of saying these things out loud, you have to kind of listen to it, but all the more reason, just come to the middle, man. Just deregister.
Yeah, no, as I say, I like it. And we've talked about deregistering before, and I agree with that. Let's get everyone registered out of those two
That's all
parties,
that happens.
right? And just register as something else. You can still vote in all the elections, do whatever you
yes,
want, but don't even give your name to the Republicans or the Democrats anymore. Let's show the people of California that it's time to have something different by deregistering and becoming an independent.
yeah, couldn't get any easier than that. I mean, that's a great first step for anybody. Anybody can do that.
Yep.
That puts the power back into your vote, really. So,
Yep.
anyways, good discussion. I like these three. I think we need to kind of come back and revisit these things as time goes on. I mean, because it's going to get interesting from here on out. As primaries start to come up and things like that. And so I think that's, and I still can't believe you didn't bring up LA, but that's okay. We'll cover that next time.
Honestly, it was on the list of things, but I knew that if I started going down there, I would never even Yeah, I've never even come close to touching on just those three things, which I think are sort of a coherent
No,
idea. And start
you
going, oh
you
my god, it would be a disaster.
you picked the right three. But I just read that this morning. $1 billion deficit. Okay, let's see how you
Yeah, it's
fix
not gonna
that
work.
one.
Oh,
Uh,
geez.
all right, we'll talk to you next week.
All right, that was great. Talk to you then.
Bye.